Hello, all my friends on social media. This is Jamie Slater coming at you. Today I'm going to play a beautiful tune called Beatrice by Sam Rivers. Sam Rivers was a saxophonist, and this song came out on an album. I think the album is called Bimsha Swing or something. Anyway, it's from 1961. And do Sam Rivers' estate a favor and don't just type it into Spotify and listen away. They're screwing artists. So buy the thing, will you? Buy the song. If you only like the song, buy it. But I think you'd like the whole record. Get it on iTunes. I think you can get it on Amazon. It's probably available as a disc. LP, not sure. But if it is, I think I'm going to buy the LP. But anyway, just remember, Spotify is not the way to make sure artists get paid. Okay, so modal interchange is something that happens in music, and it makes things a little more complicated. I'm not going to go into it. It's an advanced concept, and I'm not sure I 100% understand it myself. I'm still learning, just like everyone else. But this tune is called Beatrice. I made a loop for the whole thing this time. I didn't just kind of make a loop for the middle or whatever. This song, I'm going to play it the head twice, which is what normally happens. I'm going to play solo over the middle, play the head out, and then the loop is going to end the song. So I did it in its entirety because I like to play with a little more, a little more forcefully, a little more animation in the middle, and the rhythm needs to kind of not be one-dimensional. It needs to have some dynamics. So dynamics is very important in music. It's something you should really work with. If I were playing with a bass player and a drummer right now, or a pianist or something like that, we would have dynamics. I'd be bringing it in nice and sweet. This tune is one of the prettier tunes out there. It's a beautiful song, and I'm going to play it for you. And then I'm going to have a conversation about this guitar that people have been asking me questions about. It's a bitchin' guitar, so we'll kind of talk about my history, the history of this guitar, and construction and all that stuff. Okay, so but for anybody just wanting to hear music, here you go. This is Beatrice by Sam Rivers. All right. Okay, so that is Beatrice by Sam Rivers. It's a really pretty tune. It's a loop. So, I don't know. It's not the same as playing with other players who actually give you something that you're not expecting to have happen. Okay? So, once again, that tune was from 1961. And buy it. You really should own it. And it's a lot better than what I'm doing here. All right? Now, it uses a concept called modal interchange where you borrow chords from usually a relative minor key. So you say have a key, B flat, and then you go to B flat minor or whatever. Usually it's a parallel major minor situation. Anyway, that's a pretty advanced lesson, and we're not going to talk about that today. Instead, we're going to talk about eye candy. We're going to talk about this. Ooh, look at that wood. Oh my goodness. Look at the neck. It's like an old violin. Okay? So this is a Gibson L-5 West Montgomery model. All right? Now, the West Montgomery model is kind of a specialized, L5. A lot of L5s. The L5 started in 1921. Okay, it was the first year that Gibson made an L5, and it was created by Lloyd Loar, who was an acoustic engineer who created first the F5 mandolin, which is that funny, goofy little scrolly looking mandolin you see a lot of those country guys playing, and he came out with a lot of instruments for Gibson, and the first one that he created for Gibson, as far as a guitar is concerned, was the L5. Okay? Now, the L5 was their... I want to say it's the first instrument to ever have these F holes in it. Okay? And that's kind of comes from the cello and the upright bass and the violin and other instruments that are handcrafted and carved. So the first L5s, when they came out, were 16-inch instruments, and the appointments were not quite as fancy. Like they had a headstock with, I think the flower pot was on the original one, this kind of flower pot inlay up here. But the Gibson logo was in a scroll, and there wasn't all this binding. It was pretty plain by comparison to this one. But it made quite an impression. Mother Maybelle Carter played one in the Carter family, and it also got picked up by quite a few jazz guitar players in, say, New York. The old school guys, Eddie Lang played one, and all these guys a little later. So the cool thing about this instrument is that it's a high-grade instrument. So low-grade instruments generally have laminate construction, meaning the wood is not, it looks like one solid piece of wood, but it's not. It's a bunch of pieces of wood, like plywood, that are glued together. Now, when I say plywood, I'm not talking about construction grade pine or something. I'm talking about woods that are pretty nice in their own right, but they're super thin, and they say the Gibson ES 175, which is a really nice guitar but uses laminate construction. What they do is they take maple and they take poplar and they turn the grain crossways, and then they do another one of maple, and so the middle ply on a 3-ply guitar like that, in that particular case, is poplar, and they have really nice pretty maple on the front and really nice pretty maple on the back, which can sometimes give you this kind of look. And they take that and they cut it to shape. They wet it after they glue up those different, layers. You have one piece. They wet it and they put it in an industrial press that also applies heat as well as pressure. And they press that wet wood into an arch shape. And after it's been there a certain amount of time, I imagine it dries up a bit from the heat and so forth, but it basically just stresses the wood to an arch construction. And they take that and they put structural braces inside, and they glue it up, and there you have a guitar. Those guitars are really handy. It's kind of the working man's guitar. It's still a pro grade instrument, but it's not hand carved or anything. So it feels a little different in the hand. It's still a nice instrument. Okay, one good thing about laminate construction guitars like that is they're not as susceptible to heat and humidity and cold and all the environmental things that can really stress guitars of solid construction. Now, the L-5 was always carved, and that was Gibson's thing. They always wanted to be the company that craftsmanship, you know. So Gibson's their thing was on an L-5 is you take a wedged shaped piece of wood like this, and you cut it right down the middle. You lay the two thick sections together. You glue them together like this, and so it's like a big double triangle. You have like a pyramid kind of a shape, and they turn that over and they start carving it. And so they carve solid wood into the shape of an arch, and they can tap tune it and things like that, and hear what the wood sounds like, and decide how thick or how thin the instrument needs to be. So this is one of those. It's one of the top quality construction types, and it's a very expensive guitar, and it's very fancy, almost a little too fancy for me, but it's pretty fancy. So when I first started guitar, I had been playing saxophone in school band for several years. So I started out playing saxophone in school band in the 6th grade, and I did that for 3 years. And instead of, 8th grade, and instead of going and marching and continuing with saxophone, which always kind of frustrated me a little bit, because to play a chord, you need two other instruments. They can only play one note at a time. And so I switched over to guitar, and I played the biggest piece of poot on the planet ever. This was a department store guitar. Now at Christmas time, you can go into a department store or a Walmart or whatever, and you can purchase like a First Act or something like that, which is a decent instrument these days. Back then, if you got a guitar from a Walmart, or that actually didn't exist, but if you got it from a Kmart or some other department store and you were to purchase it, it really wasn't very good. It had really high action. The electronics didn't sound good. It was bad. But I played it for, I don't know. I started in late 83 or something. And I started playing this instrument, and I played until my fingers hurt, until they bled, because the action was really high, but it didn't stop me at the time. I was trying to play rock stuff. And so it was a lot of, power chord type things. And I played that for a while. Then for my 16th birthday, my mom got me a Gibson Les Paul. She's traded in my saxophone, which was rather expensive at the time, like $600 or something. Traded it in and got me a lower line Les Paul, like an XR2 model, I think was the model in the 80s. And it was a flat top Les Paul, but it had pretty wood, and it had the shape, and it had dot markers on the neck, so it wasn't fancy, and it didn't have a lot of binding. It had a sticker logo, and it had a set of mini humbuckers like a Les Paul Deluxe had, where they had a little ring that went all the way around them that was a little bigger on the edges for a mini humbucker. It also had a little switch in the top that allowed you to split the coils on the pickups and stuff. So I loved that guitar, and I played that guitar for years and years, played rock and punk and all sorts of different styles on it. And I played that until, I guess, about 1988, 89, I started listening to jazz. and I heard Wes Montgomery, and I saw the cover of Boss Guitar, Wes Montgomery with an L-5 like this. And I've always kind of wanted one. Every time I saw a picture of him, he was playing a guitar like this, big fat jazz guitar, and I loved his sound. He had a very beautiful sounding instrument, and I always kind of wanted one, but even at that time, the guitars were incredibly expensive, and I was maybe, in '88, I was 20. So that was a pipe dream. I started working for music stores, and eventually I worked at a store that had Epiphone Joe Pass guitar, which was it was kind of weird. It wasn't like a 175 or something. It had a Venetian cutaway like this one, a rounded cutaway, and it had a pickup in it, and it was made in Korea back when the Koreans weren't really kicking ass doing this stuff. It was kind of a new place to do inexpensive construction of instruments. And I kind of bought that and played that for a little while, but I always kind of went back to my Les Paul because the Gibson neck shapes, Epiphone kind of had it, but the sound wasn't there, and it felt like a cheap guitar. So a little later on after that, I got an opportunity to buy a Gibson Howard Roberts Fusion, I think in like 1990, 1991. And that guitar was a 88 or 88, I think. Howard Roberts Fusion, which was a semi-hollow body, which means it had the F-holes, but it had a solid block of wood in the middle. And it wasn't quite there, but it was my first foray into a really decent jazz guitar sound. And I changed the pickups to some Seymour Duncans, and it sounded great. And I played that for a little while. It was expensive for the time. I think I paid $850 for it or something. I played it for years. I think my next guitar that I got after that was a Carvin Allen Holdsworth model, which looks sort of like a solid body, like a weird Telecaster, but it was hollow, and it gave me a little bit of a hollow sound, but it was really versatile. You could use it for rock, you could do, and I was still trying to pay the bills playing some rock music. You could use it for jazz. It had a pretty tone. When I first started out on guitar playing rock, I really was concentrating on learning how to play, and a lot of the music I liked was the Randy Rhoads stuff, and Ozzy and Black Sabbath and Hendrix, and a lot of the grungier sounding things, and the metal, and I played in a metal band, and toured with those guys for a little while. Opened it up for Helix and Molly Hatchet, and a little later on I started getting into REM, and I started getting to the XTC and the Smiths, and cleaner guitar sounds kind of started to be what I concentrated on. And then I think in 89 or 88 I got a Wes Montgomery record and a Coltrane record, and I really started thinking about jazz and really started to kind of think about doing that. So that was kind of a digression. Sorry. So I ended up playing the Howard Roberts Fusion for a long time and switching it out with the Carvin, and then I sold the Carvin and went to the Howard Roberts all the time. And then eventually I got a Pat Metheny model, like Ibanez PM20, I think. It like 2008 or something. And I played that guitar for a little while, and right after that, a pretty well-heeled friend of mine he used to pay me like tuition for lessons in 6-month increments or whatever, and he had just gotten one of these, an L-5 Wes Montgomery, because I had expressed to him how badly that was my dream guitar and that's the one to get, and he bought one, and he had been playing a ES-175, and I told him that once you get that L5, you're not going to care about that 175. And he didn't believe me at first, but then eventually he's like, yeah, I don't care about the 175. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll trade you the ES-175 for a year's worth of guitar lessons. And I think at the time that was about $2,400 or something. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. and I got an ES-175, a double pickup model, same pretty much color as this, like a tobacco sunburst. It was a 2008. It was a pretty guitar. It was just like a year old when I got it in 2010. I think is when I got that, and I played the fool out of it. But it always had one too many pickups. It always had a bridge pickup, which, on a jazz guitar like that or a hollow body guitar, unless you're into rockabilly and you want to sound like Duane Eddy or like Scotty Moore, Elvis's guitar player, or have that classic sound clean, it's just really useless having a pickup back there like that. It's just adding weight to the top, which shuts the guitar down a little bit acoustically. And there's more electronics than you need too, because you got an extra knob, two extra knobs, and and you got a switch up here, which you don't need. And but I played it and I loved it, and it was a definite step up for me. For some reason, when I owned all these other guitars, like the Pat Metheny, which was a nice guitar for the money, for like $1,000, it's hard to go wrong with that guitar. But when I got the 175, it was a little bit heavier. The neck shape, Gibson neck shapes, I think having that Les Paul first, and then going to the Epiphone, and then going to the Howard Roberts, and then now the 175, or at that time, the 175, it just seems like Gibson neck shapes always felt like home, for one thing. And another thing, they just always had that classic look. You get a 175. Jim Hall played an ES-175, and a lot of guys, Herb Ellis played a 175, and they eventually came up with an ES-165, which was his model. But a ton of guys played 175s, and it's still considered the working man's jazz guitar. In other words, it's got that laminate construction, but it keeps you from it's a basic instrument, kind of. It's just enough to do the job, and it's a very all of my Gibson guitars have been like this. They're very honest instruments, meaning and also my way of thinking about tone, it's an honest instrument, meaning if you screw up, everybody's going to know it. There's no hiding behind anything. You have to play well. If you don't play well, everybody's going to hear your mistakes, and everybody's going to hear your technical issues. So it kind of inspires you to keep going and increasing your technique and your ability to play well on the instrument. I played the 175 a while. Then out of the blue, I got an opportunity to buy an Epiphone, 1949 Epiphone, Blackstone, which is a carved top guitar, non-cutaway, which I love non-cutaway. It's just something about having that same exact look on the bottom just makes me happy. I don't know why. I also don't play a lot up in this part of the neck, so it wasn't a big deal for me. But it was a 1949 Epiphone Blackstone, which wasn't a top-of-the-line model for them. It was kind of an intermediate model, but it had a carved spruce top, like this instrument does, but a laminated maple sides and back. And it sounded just a lot more acoustic and live. Now, I don't know what comes first. I don't know if it's chicken or egg here. But older guitars have a certain sound to them. And I don't know if they came from the factory with that sound, or if just after years and years and years of the wood drying out and the little tubules in the wood becoming crystallized, if they sound better and they get lighter and everything is just better with old guitars because of that. I don't know if it's age or if it came from the factory that way, but I can tell you that older guitars have a certain something that is very difficult to recreate brand new from a factory guitar now. Okay? And those, now at the time, 1949, Epiphones were made in New York City. They weren't like a cheap off-brand. They were Gibson's biggest competitor. And that particular instrument was 16 inches and I think 3/8, 16 and 3/8 wide. So every time Gibson would come out with a guitar that was 16 inches, Epiphone would come out with one that was 3/8 bigger. So at the time, there was no amplification. Amplification was kind of a new thing, and not everybody had them. So they made guitars that were loud, and the bigger the guitar, the louder the guitar. The L-5 started out as a 16-inch guitar. Then they went to an advanced body L-5, which was a 17-inch guitar. It got bigger. The dimensions got bigger, which means acoustically, it was louder, okay? And at the time, you were playing with a jazz orchestra if you played one of these guitars generally, or, they used them in country too. But a lot of times you were playing with a jazz orchestra, which means there was a drummer, a pianist, an upright bass player, and a bunch of horns. So guys like Freddie Green, those classic jazz guitarists for orchestras, did a lot of very choppy sounding stuff because the guitar was a percussion instrument in a way. That was what you heard of a guitar if you were in the audience with a big band, and they kept really high action and really heavy strings, and they really set it up to be loud as they could manage it. The L-5, or should I say amplification from Gibson, started in the late 30s, early 40s with a Charlie Christian pickup, which is a really kind of stylized hexagonal pickup, and it mounted like here inside of the guitar, and it had 3 triangle laid out bolts that went through the top, so you could adjust it somewhat, and it was a very weak set of cobalt magnets, which you can't find anymore, and it had a certain sound to it. But one of the big problems with the sound, and this is a single coil pickup, so was the Charlie Christian. So the Charlie Christian had a single coil pickup, and what would happen is it would act like an antenna. And that antenna, you hear that? Hear how it goes away? But the closer I get to my main light here shining on my face, the more of a hum that you hear. And that, in some rooms, can be a real problem. In a room with like a lot of stuff, or a refrigerator on the same circuit as your amp, or things like that, it can be a real problem. Well, they ended up, getting a different type of pickup that was a little better about it, and that was a P90. P90s sounded really nice. It was also a single coil design, but by I want to say the early to mid 50s, they started using what's called a humbucker design, which is a double coil pickup, and everything is reversed. The magnetism is reversed, and the winds on one of the coils is reversed, and it's sort of like your Bose noise canceling headphones. It takes in the sound, and then it flips it 180 and feeds it back to you, and it cancels out the noise. Well, that electronically is what a humbucker pickup does. So the L-5 kept getting bigger. It eventually got to its final size of 17 inches. And then they started creating this cutaway here. And they called that the L-5P, or L-5 Premier. And it had a cutaway. And so this guitar has kind of looked like this since, I think, like the late 30s. They started kind of making them look like this. And it went on. Now, this is a Wes Montgomery model. Wes Montgomery had a bunch of L5s. It kind of seemed to be his go-to instrument. And he had him create an L5 like this for him, with a single pickup like this one has. And he played those on a lot of appearances on television and things like that back when he was getting big in the 60s. And but he owned a ton of L5s, and some of them had 2 pickups, and you never know. You listen to a record and they sound great. Some of them had what's called an Alnico staple pickup, which was kind of a gateway between P9, I think between the P90 and the PAF, and they have a certain sound to them that is really sensitive and very. They just sound real sensitive. Like when he plays light, you can really hear it. There's a clarity there that was really, in my mind, is very important to have. Okay, so this is a carved guitar, and I've always wanted an L-5. I finally got an opportunity to get my dream guitar a little ways back, and I was playing my Epiphone, my 49 Epiphone at the time, and I loved it, and I wish I still had it because that guitar was a cannon, all right? Meaning there was a lot of low end, there was a lot of mid range, there was a lot of high end. I had a floating pickup on it, but it was a very thin top on it, so it was really loud acoustically, and it was also kind of a feedback machine, so you had to be really careful how you sat near the amp. If I had my amp up as much as this and I was sitting this close to the amp as I am right now, I would have to really control, be trying to feed back. I'd have to turn on the volume and really be careful of feedback. And so that guitar was very loud acoustically, but what happens when guitars are loud acoustically is they don't have much sustain because they were created to be percussion instruments. Okay, so you would get this really loud bop, and then it would go away right away. You couldn't, with this guitar, and we're going to talk about why that is here in a minute, but notice it's still holding out. And if I turn on an amp, it'll sit there for a good long time. It'll just sit there and sustain. I could set this on a stand, start it going, go to the restroom, come back, and it'll still be going to a certain degree. Not much, but still there. So at some point in Gibson's development, they went from taking a guitar that would normally be an acoustic guitar traditionally, and their first concept was, let's take that guitar that works really well and let's put a pickup on it and make it louder. And they didn't really redesign anything, they just kind of put a pickup on it to make it louder. And that's how these guitars started. They started out as an acoustic guitar with electronics on it so it could be louder. Later on, I think Gibson changed the way that they construct their instruments. And when you take a thinner top and you brace it for strings and then you put heavy strings on it, like these are 13s, and I've played as high as 14 gauge strings, but these are 13 gauge round wound strings. That's a lot of tension. And it's transferred to the bridge right here, and that pushes down on the top. These tops have an arch. So over time, what would happen on old Gibsons is all that string tension over the years would take an instrument that's arched like this and eventually cave it in from the string tension. Gibsons have a lifetime warranty on them. So I think what they had to do was do a lot of lifetime warranty work on collapsed tops, on arch tops. And so I think they got tired of doing the warranty work. And as the electronics became more advanced, they went, okay, well, let's concentrate on the electronics and brace the guitar a little stiffer and keep ourselves from having to do all these extra repairs and things like that. So that's what they did. So this guitar, while it looks like an old style Gibson, and I mean it still has an acoustic tone to it that's not bad. It's not as loud and not as, doesn't pop out at you the way that they used to. It's a good compromise. Gibson went from making acoustic guitars that happened to have a pickup on them to making electric guitars that happen to be hollow, And for me as a modern player, I'm good with this because this allows me to have sustain. Like a piano player with a sustain pedal. that first chord, you know, that note is still ringing, and I can do a lot of different things and play over it. And having too much sustain is good, because I can always use my technique. Instead of holding it out, I'll just release a little of the tension and take it out when I want to. But if you don't have enough sustain, it leads me personally as a player to play more. You know, I end up playing a lot more notes, because as soon as I play a note, it goes away. I can't just play a note and it doesn't sustain that way with some of the older style instruments, okay? So this is a Gibson L-5 West Montgomery, all right? And the next thing I have to talk about is the electronics. So the electronics, everything I buy, I end up changing the pickups. And the reason why I end up changing the pickups on an archtop guitar like this is because I'm looking for a more organic sound. Now, this guitar, when I went inside of it and got the pickup out, I took the whole wiring harness out at one time. So if I ever, I don't think this will ever happen, but if I ever sell this instrument, I can just put it right back to original and sell it, okay? I looked at the back of the pickup, and it's got like the name of the person that wound the pickup. Everything is a little more extra with this model. So this is, if we look at the fingerboard, you see all those, see the edge of the body, all those lines? That's like 5-ply binding. And then they do it again here on the side. You can see how thick the top is. Maybe you can see it. Do you see how it gets thicker here in the middle than at the edge? That's the carve on the top. So when they cut into that top to make that cutaway, you can see that it's thicker in the middle. There was like one individual that carved this thing out of a solid block of wood. And it really makes a difference from this to a laminated guitar. A laminated guitar really feels differently than this guitar, okay? But the pickup winding was next step. They got the initials of the person that wound it and everything. And a lot of people would, their heads would explode if I said I rewired this guitar. But I took the whole harness out. So if I ever wanted to put it back original, I just drop it back in. I solder a ground wire to it, and I'm done. Okay, so I can always put it back. But these guitars, unlike the old style guitars where everything is real bright, this has a lot of low end to it. And almost all Gibsons have a bit of low end to them. But it's one of the things that happened when they went from an acoustic guitar with a pickup to an electric guitar that happens to be hollow, is it ended up thickening up the sound a bit when they got rid of some of that acousticness. So with the standard issue hand wound 57 Classic that Gibson puts in them, this sounds very much like an electric guitar. It had like a thickness to it, and it was a little bit artificial. The way that I like my pickups to work is if I were to play a chord and I bring up the volume slowly, I want it to sound like the guitar, just getting louder. I don't, and I can turn off all the effects and you can kind of really hear it. But it just sounds like the guitar. There's not a lot of extra added to it, you know? I wanted that acoustic sound, so I ended up putting a Charlie Christian pickup in this guitar because I really like single coils. They're very sensitive. They give me a little more of an acoustic quality to the instrument, and that's what I'm looking for. Now, along with that wiring, I put a push-pull volume pot in here, and I have a dummy coil of this pickup. That means I've got a reverse wound coil that is the same dimensions and everything of this, and it's velcroed inside of the body of the guitar. So this is a single coil. If I want to kick in that dummy coil, it'll give me a little bit of hum canceling. I pull that out. Notice it got a little thicker. Yeah, you hear it? Here's the double coil again. It's a little bit of a tone difference. And it also helps you to cut down on the hum in some rooms. Depends on the room. Okay? But that's how this guitar is wired. And I also have the tone pot I wanted with the tone capacitor is a little different than what comes standard from the factory. This tone control, if you listen to it, it is much more usable than the factory tone control. So a factory tone control, as I turn it down, so now I'm starting on 10. I'm going to put it on about 7. Still usable. Take it down to about 5. Still usable. A lot of guitars, by the time you get to 5, it's starting to get real muddy. And there's 4. With that double coil on and with that on about 4, that's what a standard Gibson with a humbucker L-5 sounds like. This is pretty much what it sounded like from the factory. It's a lot thicker of an instrument. If I take my tone control down a little bit more to about 2.5, it's still usable. But it's starting, for me, it's getting way unusable, and that's all the way off. And I'm gonna bring it up just a little. That's at 3. So the tone control with this other pod in it is a lot more usable than a standard tone pod. And it just has to do with the capacitor, the amount of high end that gets bled off when you that gets bled off when you turn it down. So when I look at effects, I am looking at effects that don't change the tone too much, that do what they do without changing the tone of the instrument, because I spend a lot of time getting the guitar itself to sound exactly the way I want to. I don't want to click on an effect and there all of a sudden the mid-range is gone, or there's a whole lot of high end and things like that. I really want it to kind of sound like it sounds, just add whatever effect I want it to have. Okay, so it took a bit of a transition to start playing this guitar when I got it. Now, when you first get a guitar, a $10,000 guitar, you're kind of afraid to touch it. You play it a little, but you're just like, you set it on a stand, you kind of want to look at it a little bit, and which I did. And I played a couple of gigs with the stock pickup in it just to see what it would do and what would happen with it. I just felt like it could sound better, and so I started to go about that business of it. But one of the things that threw me a lot in the beginning was 2 things. I was coming from the Epiphone. It was a lot more acoustically live, a lot more feedback and stuff, but it was a cannon, man. If I played a low string, whoa! I mean, it just popped through the mix. And if I played hard, I could just really shine through on my solos. Although the sustain wasn't there, okay? But it was a 16-inch guitar, and that when I say 16-inch, the lower bout was 16 on my Epiphone, and it was also 16 on my ES-175. So going from a 16-inch guitar to a 17-inch guitar in some ways was a little hard, but in other ways it was really cool. The first way that it was cool is that a 17-inch guitar just has a power to it that a 16-inch guitar doesn't have. There's just a power to it. It allows you to pop through the mix like the older acoustic, instrument did, and plus it's carved, so it feels really good against your body. There's just a big difference as to how it vibrates. When I play this instrument, I feel the whole body vibrate against my chest, and it really improves the quality of your experience when you're playing an instrument. It's also long scale. It's 25.5-inch scale. So was my 16-inch Epiphone, which I'd gotten used to. And my ES-175 is a short scale guitar, so it had a Les Paul scale, which is 24 3/4 rather than 25.5. Now we're only talking about what, 3/4 of an inch. You wouldn't think it would make that big of a difference, but it does. The spacing is a little wider on the instrument, but the big thing it does sonically is that when you play a chord on a short scale like a 175, it sounds like the Everly Brothers. It's very organic. There's like a Everly Brothers kind of harmonization when they sing together. It's real organic and natural, and it sounds good. But when you play a chord on a long scale guitar, it's like each note in the chord is a professional singer. Okay? And each note has a separation, like it's its own entity, and they're singing together like Take Six or any of those really good vocal groups. So if I play, every note has a clarity of its own, and that's one of the qualities of a long scale instrument that you enjoy when you play it, if you like that sort of thing. Now it is a little harder to reach things, and I spend a lot of time on the bandstand with my eyes shut because I'm really listening. And when I first migrated from a short scale guitar to a long scale guitar, I had to look a lot more, because inevitably where I thought I was a half step away from where I was, and that's also a function with where the guitar body meets the neck. Sometimes that can throw you off too. But I've gotten so used to playing this guitar now that I'm pretty used to that. Another thing that throws you a little bit, moving from a 16-inch guitar to a 17-inch guitar, is this is a carved instrument, and it has a deep carve on it. So if you look at this, you'll see there's an arch to this back, and there's an arch to this front, and it's 17 inches at the lower bout, which means it felt at first like I was holding a bubble. It was just round and big in a subtle way, but if you play, you know what I'm talking about. It was a big guitar, and where my arm fell across this instrument was different from where my arm fell across the 175 or the Epiphone. So it took a minute to kind of get to a place where I could play this instrument as reliably as others. But Gibson doesn't make this guitar as a factory guitar anymore. I think there was a time when Gibson made it as a factory guitar. Not a factory, but you know what I mean. They've always charged you top price, and there was always a couple of craftsmen. This one has a guy's name on the label. The guy that oversaw the team of 2 or 3 dudes that built this instrument. It takes a long time to do it, and they do it. There's a lot of handwork involved, and there's a lot of listening and specialization to make sure this guitar sounds good. It's not like a factory instrument. With this, they use the best woods they have. They put a lot of fancy appointments on it with the binding and the gold hardware and everything, and they do a lot with that. Now, Gibson, having undergone its recent bankruptcy, they don't put this in the catalog anymore, and I want to say that rid of most of the guys in the Crimson Custom shop, which is what these guitars are, where they were from. They had a special shop that just dealt with arch tops and other really, really high-end Gibson guitars as far as this type of construction. Flat tops, they have a group of guys that just do flat tops out in Montana, and this is made, I think, in Memphis, Tennessee. So, and most of their factory guitars are made in Nashville. So if you want one of these now, you have to give them $10,000 or $11,000 and then wait a year and a half or 2 years until they're done with it, and then they'll call you and send you the guitar. So the best way to look for one of these is, say, on the used market, and usually you can get them $7,000-8,000. I got a really good deal on this one because I knew the guy that was selling it, and he was in a hurry to get some money out of it. He wanted to buy something else and needed some money. But anyway, Gibson L-5 West Montgomery. All the changes I've made to it. I also put a Sadowski bridge on this. It came with a gold, Nashville Tune-O-Matic, which is a really nice bridge as well that gets your intonation perfect. I put a Sadowski bridge, ebony bridge on this. Original bridge saddle with the inlays here. The bridge base with the inlays here is original. The saddle on top is aftermarket. It's a Sadowski. I change everything that I do, and I turn a guitar into exactly what I want to hear and what I want to sound like. And it's a big deal for me. If I don't sound right, I can't play right. So this is a Gibson L-5 West Montgomery, and it's awesome. And so if you get a chance to play one, try it out. If you can afford one, congratulations. And they're going to probably be worth more money in the future because I don't know the same guys in the shop are the same guys that made this guitar and the previous generations, and I don't know that the quality and the materials are going to be there. I know somebody that has one of these, but instead of an ebony fingerboard, it has a rich light fingerboard, which is kind of a synthetic material made out of paper pulp and stuff, because they're trying to, ebony is an expensive wood and it's getting harder to get dark, high quality ebony. Certain woods are getting tougher to find and more difficult to use in construction. So they're trying to be more sustainable about it. So I'm not saying the guitars sound any different. I'm just saying if you're going to pay $10,000 for a guitar, you don't want a fingerboard that looks like ebony. You want ebony, If you have any questions about the music or about the guitars or about my amp or anything, I teach lessons. If you want to know about music, the tune today was Beatrice from Sam Rivers. Hope I didn't bore you guys to tears with all this gear talk. But check out Beatrice by Sam Rivers. It uses a concept called modal interchange, which allows the music to be a lot more interesting. So, Jamie Slater signing off, and thank you so much for listening.